I'm Sheriff Matt Clifford, and you're listening to Ada County Sheriff Cold Case Files. In this episode, Deputy Montag and Detective Cooper will be discussing an investigation involving the 1984 disappearance and murder of 31-year-old Linda Hatfield. We hope that by getting this information out, we can track down additional leads to help bring closure and justice to this victim and her family. This podcast contains violent themes, including murder and sexual assault. Listener discretion is advised.
I'm Deputy Lauren Montag with the Ada County Sheriff's Office, and today I'm sitting down with cold case investigator Detective Tim Cooper. Detective Cooper has 22 years of law enforcement experience, 10 of which have been with the Ada County Sheriff's Office. In addition to his regular duties as a narcotics canine handler, Detective Cooper is assigned to our cold cases. Today, we will be discussing a case Detective Cooper is currently working on. This case involves the 1984 disappearance and murder of 31-year-old Linda Hatfield. Detective Cooper, can you introduce us to Linda's case?
Yeah. Linda lived in Canyon County, but she worked in Ada County. This case goes back to May of 1984. Linda had just returned from a Memorial Day camping trip and had to work on the evening of the 29th of May in 84 at a club that's no longer in Ada County, but it was called the Hunt Club. And this was sort of a bar dance atmosphere where women danced and would greet guests at tables and that kind of thing. So she had started there as a waitress, then became a dancer. And as I say, she had to work that evening. So she said goodbye to her husband that morning. They lived in Middleton. She went to work around the noon hour for a meeting that they had. And since she didn't have to be officially to work until around 6 or 7 p.m., she spent that afternoon driving around with a couple of female coworkers. One of them was looking for an apartment. And that kind of starts her day. We have a lot of questions about that time, but we'll get into that later. But she eventually makes it into work around, like, as I say, 6 or 7. Some people encounter her. There's some statements that she may have been sick that evening. She spoke with a few of the regular guests. We obtained statements from them. She gets off of work around 1 a.m. The bouncer walks her to her car and sees her drive away back toward Middleton. She's never seen or heard from again.
What area of town was the Hunt Club located in?
That was on Chinden Boulevard in Garden City. That was there were several clubs over there. I think we talked about Mary Tracy, another case. It was very near to the Idaho Club as well. There was sort of a strip of clubs back in that period that existed that were kind of similar to one another, and that's the one she worked at. And I should back up a little bit. So some of these things are going to tie in later, and we do hope to get some leads on some of these things. So while she's at the club, and even before that, these two female coworkers that she was with, they had drinks. They made drinks for her, and she may have been a little inebriated by the time she got to work, which we felt was unusual.
When you say they made drinks, that was prior to her shift when they were driving around looking for an apartment for one of her coworkers?
Correct.
Okay.
These drink glasses were later found in Linda's vehicle when it was recovered. And so, we took those as evidence. We still have them. In fact, we just pulled them out of evidence the other day. We're analyzing those again. Yeah, so one of the female coworkers actually later borrowed her car while she was at work and didn't bring it back till just before her shift ended. And we thought that was interesting as well. So She's observed at about 10 p.m. inside the club. She's very sick. She was in one of the bathrooms throwing up. And at about 1 a.m., a coworker who was later interviewed recalled speaking with Linda and recalled that she had mentioned having a lot of money that she had just acquired. And there was some talk that she might actually have also received a large insurance settlement of some sort. And so that was kind of known, I guess you could say, around the club at that time, that she was coming into some money. And that kind of factors into some of what we learned later. But one man was interviewed that was a known associate of Linda's that frequented the club pretty much on a nightly basis. And she had worked with him on occasion as well. He had told law enforcement at that time that she was going to have she was doing a private show, dancing, after she got off work. And this was to be at a trailer of some sort, or double wide, in the area where her car was later discovered. She had said it was in the area of Victory and Liberty. And so we thought that was interesting. And this man and other independent sources that we interviewed later provided details regarding her abduction, specifically some of the possible conspirators involved, and how the crime was organized. And so we can come back to some of that, but I'm going to withhold a lot of those details, but we can discuss some of that. So the last for sure sighting of her was in Ada County, and that was at 1:05 in the morning. The bouncer who worked there at the time walked her to her car, and that was protocol for all of the dancers when they would leave. And she was seen placing her bags up front with her when she got in. And now these bags were later found in the trunk of the car. And so she left off. It was raining that evening. And he just kind of observed her long enough to see her pull out onto Chinden and head west towards Middleton. A likely sighting of her, and highly probable, is at 2 a.m. Or shortly before. Some witnesses that lived in Middleton awoke to some type of verbal dispute occurring out on their street. This was a road that Linda would have taken to get home. They see a car, a maroon T-Bird, which is what Linda drove, and another vehicle. They heard the argument seemed to consist of this man trying to tell the occupant of the T-Bird that he broke her tail lens. There was pre-existing damage to the tail lens of the car, so anybody pulling up behind Linda making this claim would have likely made her skeptical. She would have known already it was already broken. So, but these witnesses recall that the man had a particular appearance, which later matches a few persons of interest in this case. And he remembered the man calling the driver of the T-Bird a derogatory name that associated that person with the female sex. And so they took it to be that there was a female in the T-Bird. The man then got back in his vehicle and chased the driver of the T-Bird northbound toward a specific location where we know one of our suspects' vehicles to have later been found. And so that was a very important clue in this case. About 8:30 in the morning of the 30th, which is, I guess, technically when Linda got off shift was the 30th. The owner of a business in the 2700 block of South Curtis called in to report Linda's vehicle was left in their lot. They didn't know this was Linda's vehicle, but in fact it would turn out to be her T-Bird. At that time, this is, I don't know if they spoke with a dispatcher or an officer or what, but they said, well, let's wait and see if the owner comes and picks it up. Linda had not been reported missing, so it wasn't terribly unusual. On the 1st of June, a couple days later, in the evening hours, Linda's husband reported her missing to the Canyon County Sheriff's Office. And in doing that, we end up co-casing this investigation with the Canyon County Sheriff's Office. In fact, we co-cased it with the Boise Police Department as well. And I will say that both agencies did phenomenal work and turned up a lot of investigative leads.
Now, when you say co-casing, what do you mean by that?
I mean, all three agencies assigned resources to this investigation early on.
So we essentially worked together on this case.
Correct.
Gotcha.
And we still do that today in some instances, but this was a situation where initially it was right on the boundaries of jurisdictional boundaries, where the sheriff's office in Boise were looking at where her car was discovered and trying to sort out whose jurisdiction it was. And so we worked it together very closely for about 5 or 6 days. And then it was ultimately turned over to our office, as it was discovered that technically where her car was in fact in the county's jurisdiction at that time. But because Linda's husband reported her missing while in Canyon County, out at their home, a Canyon deputy responded to take that report. And so that's in turn got the Canyon County Sheriff's Office involved. And that would turn out to be a good thing, because a very talented detective that is now retired, Wayne Christie, at Canyon County, ended up getting back into this case about 15 years later. And he did some phenomenal work that has really helped us get to where we are today. So moving forward, June 2nd, 84, the owner of that business on South Curtis again calls in, says, hey, the car is still here. And by this time, Linda had been reported missing just the evening before. So that's when our agency and Boise Police Department descended on that location on the morning of June 2nd, about 7:30 in the morning. And we processed the vehicle. We were out there for several hours. And the husband came out. We had him from a distance help us kind of inventory what was in there, what was not in there. And he did notice that Linda's wallet containing her ID and an unknown amount of money was not present. And that would become very important. Now's a good time to mention, I've mentioned Linda was married. She had kids. As with any homicide, investigators sometimes look at the spouse, to make sure that they're not involved, or if they are involved, that we collect evidence accordingly. And this was a case where initially a lot of the tips that came in were, they spanned her coworkers, her friends, everyone that knew her, but also her husband. And I can say with high confidence that we have over the years looked at those leads, and I don't find anything to suggest that her husband was involved in this. Maybe they didn't have the perfect marriage all of the time, but that's a far cry from him being involved in this what we believe to be a brutal crime. So, but moving forward from that, just having said that, there was enough evidence observed by all of the agencies involved at that time that after a few days, I believe it was on June 4th, we had a meeting, and Boise Police, Ada Sheriff, Canyon Sheriff, detectives did agree that the direction the case was flowing, and it did appear that this was likely a homicide. And so the decision was made to treat it as such and to classify it as such. And so on our end at the Ada County Sheriff's Office, we were no longer investigating a missing person or just a possible abduction. This was a homicide. Now,
At that point, had Linda's remains been found?
No, Linda's remains have not been found to date, and we have some high probability areas that we would like to look at a little closer, perhaps as we get further into the thaw and into the spring. We can start doing that. We've had some discussions with our forensics team here, and so we do plan on moving forward with, as I say, investigating a couple of sites. But no, her remains have never been found. But I'll get into some of the evidence here in a minute of what we did find, and that's really what turned this from missing person to homicide. On June 5th, we searched the New York Canal. Our investigators from the Ada County Sheriff's Office got out on foot, several of them with our forensic personnel at that time, and we actually searched it all the way to Lake Lowell, from the area of South Curtis, which is kind of out by the airport. So this was a very intensive search, but the water was flowing at that time of year. And so looking in the canal for that distance was made difficult by the environment issues. We did not find anything at that time. We did start interviewing people that Linda worked with. There were two female associates that she worked with that were interviewed. They noted that the inside and outside of Linda's car, when they viewed it here at the sheriff's office, we had towed it back here, that they noticed it was much muddier than it had been during the day when they had rode around with her looking for the apartment. They identified some of the clothes that were in the car. And as I say, some of this had been moved to the trunk, which, as you recall, the bouncer had seen her place it up front. Some of these clothes included a red halter top that she was last seen wearing and a pair of white shorts. There may have been some mud on the white shorts that was noted. One of these females later implicated the other as possibly being involved, and so I won't go into a terrible amount of detail on that, but I do think that's an important part of the investigation, because other people that we interviewed also brought these two up as possibly being involved in at least the planning, if not portions of the execution of Linda's disappearance. And so we'll go ahead and just leave it at that for now. It was later revealed that Linda might have been pregnant at the time of her disappearance. And it was said that numerous parties might have had motive to harm Linda, especially if she had come into money. And just to take a second to kind of describe who she was as a person, Linda was someone that was said that possibly didn't like working at the hunt club. She was said to be, you might say, somewhat naive or kind of a vulnerable type. She thought the best of people. No criminal history whatsoever. I mean, just maybe you might say a little too nice to be, assumed to be working at a place like that at that time of night, dancing and so forth. So people did tell us that she was more the type to go along with someone if they attempted to abduct her instead of trying to fight back. And so if that gives you some impression of, of who Linda was in that sense of how this might have happened, that was just a repeated theme during the investigation. Fast forward to November 1st, 1984. Linda's wallet and credit cards are found by some citizens who were down by the New York Canal in the area of South Curtis, which is, I said, is where her vehicle was recovered. They found these items about 600 yards from where we had initially processed the vehicle. The canal had been emptied about mid-October, so that made it a lot easier for the citizens to spot these items. Linda's abduction and suspected homicide had become a thing of news, so people, I think, kind of knew to be on the lookout for any evidence, especially in that area. Time continues to go on. Months turn into years. There's numerous sightings, potential sightings of people calling in, seeing Linda in other states, locally. Numerous bodies are recovered in other cases, other states, parts of the country. Lots of people called in various theories. These were all checked out. Nothing matches up. So we obtained Linda's dental records per court order, and we still have them. And by November of 1984, after her wallet's found, there's really no new leads that are coming in on this case. A few years later, in the summer of 1987, the Third District Court ruled that there was clear and convincing evidence that Linda was dead, and based on information that was put before them on this case. 1988, a man came forward who had been interviewed before, and we were suspicious that he likely had more information about Linda's disappearance. He contacted us, and he admitted that he and Linda had been acquainted for a while. He was a known drug dealer, and many people thought he might have been involved in prostitution activity. He frequented the hunt club during the 1980s. He implicates two other men aside from a gentleman that would later become a main suspect, a principal in this case. And he implicates these two other men as also being involved in a larger conspiracy, possibly involving a couple other people to set Linda up. He recalled that Linda had received quite a bit of money that night, and there was the insurance and all of that. So a couple of the subjects that he implicated did also match the description that the witnesses in Middleton saw Linda arguing with. And this was a very generalized description, and so, but we were able to use that to kind of rule out some other people that, people were calling in and things like that. So throughout 1989, more leads surface implicating some of those who were with Linda at work on the night she disappeared as possibly being involved in her disappearance. Some details are rather specific. Again, I won't get too heavy into that, but the case remained active in the papers, on TV. We used to have a show called Idaho at Large that aired locally. That helped generate some leads in the late 80s, but very little in the way of new information surfaces. And so we did check areas of Middleton and Ada County, and did ground searches at various times throughout the 80s to include just within days of Linda's disappearance. And there were some suspicious items that we recovered. But again, Linda's remains have not been. So that kind of sums up, her disappearance leading up in the first few days and in the weeks and months that followed. But some aspects of our office's investigation that I think your listeners might hear, and if they lived in that time or knew Linda, they might think back on. Kerry Burgess was always a prime suspect of ours. He's now deceased. He died in prison. From the early days of Linda's disappearance, he was a suspect. And I'll get into that. Around the time of Linda's disappearance, a few weeks later, Kerry's brother-in-law helped make that revelation known to our office that he might be involved. His brother-in-law is also now passed. But the story we got from the brother-in-law was that he and his wife were awakened on the evening of Linda's disappearance between about 2 and 3 in the morning. Kerry had arrived at their house, which was within eyesight of Linda's vehicle where it was recovered on South Curtis. Kerry was covered in mud, they said, from his shoes all the way up to his chest. He had 2 guns, one that they described as a machine gun, and 2 knives on his person. He showed them a woman's wedding ring set, which they recalled had a diamond stone. And he was described to be somewhat manic and just out of sorts, even for him, as he was a known methamphetamine user. But even what they were used to seeing was quite a bit above his normal state of hysteria, what have you. Something the brother-in-law told us as well was that Kerry Burgess had a history of sexual assaults on women, some of which he believed were unsolved at that time and thus still would be. He recalled past instances where Kerry had brought him to hotel rooms where he was keeping women. He recalled another incident where Kerry abducted a woman who was hitchhiking and drove her down to a river where he sexually assaulted her. And so he had on occasion gone to the hunt club with Kerry, and he recalled seeing Kerry argue with a woman inside the hunt club that he thought was actually Linda. So that also kind of tied Kerry into this.
Now, you said Kerry died in prison. What was he in prison for?
He was in prison for another abduction and rape of a woman. And that actually occurred shortly after Linda's disappearance. We a now deceased jailhouse informant, he passed natural causes. He once told us that Linda's death came up numerous times when he was incarcerated with Carrie Burgess. He said Carrie used to say that, well, I can't talk about it because I might have to take a polygraph in the future, and I don't want to, psych myself out. And he would say things like, they'll never find her body because it's ashes now. And so that kind of led this person to think that he tried to burn her. But he did reportedly admit in jail that he murdered Linda Hatfield to this individual. So our office later interviewed a source that was said to have gone to Portland with Carrie immediately after Linda disappeared. So he skipped town just within days. And this source thought they saw a Bible in Carrie's vehicle, which had a name inside they thought might have been Linda Hatfield's name. And they recalled he was in possession of some effects and some makeup and things you might find in a woman's purse. And also a necklace that closely matched one that Linda was known to wear. And so, and as far as the wedding ring set, we later obtained a picture of Linda's wedding ring set from her mother, and numerous people identified that as being very similar, if not the same, as what Carrie had the night he showed up to his brother-in-law's. So, of course, we interviewed his sister-in-law as well. She was apprehensive about speaking with us. She was known to have a close relationship with Carrie, so she was a little protective of him, but she reportedly told Carrie's ex-wife that he gave her the wedding ring set. So we looked into that for quite a while, and that she then reportedly said that she traded the wedding ring set for drugs. So there's still some concern that this wedding ring set might be floating around the area somewhere. So if anybody would know anything about that, we'd certainly want to hear from them. But it was also said by her people close to her that she might have actually kept it and just been lying to us. So we don't know for certain what happened to it. But this individual, his sister-in-law, it was said that any time Linda's disappearance would come up, she would leave the room or get uncomfortable. And so we definitely wanted to interview her back then, and we did. And she was, I'll just say, based on the reports, you might say excessively nervous, worked up. Said she didn't remember much, which was a stark contrast to what her husband had told us about the night that Carrie arrived. But we did eventually, what we got out of her was essentially the same story that the brother-in-law had told us. She said that she washed Carrie's clothes while he took a shower, bringing the gun and knives into the shower with him. That she remembered he didn't arrive in a vehicle, so she was kind of wondering, like, well, how did he get here? He said his car broke down. And so after the clothes were washed and dried, it was getting to be about sun up at this time, 7 or so in the morning. Brother-in-law drives Carrie to where he says his car is, which is just a couple hundred yards up the road from where these witnesses in Middleton saw the T-Bird argument taking place in the street. And so he said that what he remembered was when Carrie got out of the vehicle saying, the whole time it had been, I got to work on my vehicle. And he made it sound like he was in dire straits and in need of a mechanic or something. Well, he ended up just getting in the vehicle and driving off. So that really made his brother-in-law suspicious right away. A few days later, Carrie takes off for Portland. He's gone for about a month. And this is all making the papers and everything. And it said that Linda lives in Middleton. Again, we later find out that where Carrie's vehicle was left was about 350 yards from the witness's house. So as he's telling us all this information, and his wife, the investigators, of course, are, bells are going off, flags are going up. They're kind of starting to put it together. But Carrie's out of town, and he'll stay out of town until the first part of July of 84. When he comes back on July 6, 84, is when he abducts and sexually assaults a woman in Boise. Has her drive him to an area in what is now North Ada County. And we later go there to search for clues, thinking this might be an area of activity for Carrie, who we know to be a potential suspect in other sexual assaults. And so we search that area. We find some interesting items. And I'll leave it at that. But throughout the late 80s and into 1990, our office conducts dozens of interviews and follow-ups on numerous leads, which I believe have been and are now very important to this investigation. But I mentioned the other sexual assault abduction. Carey is essentially sentenced to life in prison over that. He is convicted, and that's how he died in prison. So that was where our investigation went cold. Is in the early 90s. I mentioned Wayne Christie, a very good detective at Canyon County Sheriff's Office. He's now retired. He picked it up in 98, because you got to remember they're working the missing person side of things. So he had reason to move forward with it. He does some great work. He notices some things right away. DNA technology is coming about. There was a company called Cellmark Diagnostics. They were, publicly doing things with the O.J. Simpson case, the John Benet Ramsey case, and everything. So Wayne decides to submit some items of evidence that we had to Cellmark. And the Ada County Sheriff's Office and Canyon County Sheriff's Office, we meet with the Ada County prosecuting attorney. We decide that we're going to, pay for the submittals. Cellmark specifically wanted to look at the white shorts. There was believed to be spermatozoa on the shorts. We wanted to have them look at the red halter top, because there was believed to be blood on that, and Linda's hairbrush that was found in her purse. So we got a search warrant, or Wayne in our office worked together to get one a body warrant for Carey Burgess. We got samples of his blood, his saliva, hair, and so forth. And in 99, Cellmark gave us a report back. They had found that the samples were too degraded for RFLP testing, but there was PCR testing that would yield higher numbers. So Canyon in our office elected to go forward with that testing. And it did prove to be beneficial to the case, as we learned that the spermatozoa was consistent as being from Carey Burgess as the contributor to the one in so many bajillion. So,
did Carey and Linda, did they know each other that we know of?
His brother-in-law thought he recalled them arguing once in the hunt club. There were some people that thought they may have had an encounter at the hunt club, but nothing substantial to say definitively. Yeah, they knew one another.
So he may have been a patron there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of thing. That same jailhouse informant I mentioned, we speak with them in 1999. They now tell us that Carey had admitted to an area where Linda's body was buried. And so this individual later took our detectives out to a specific area along the New York Canal. And we searched the area, but we didn't recover her. But it is consistent with one of a couple locations where our office believes she may be buried. So that information was also corroborated by somebody I'll say was very close to Carey at the time. So we were interested in that area as being, as I say, one of about three or so. Looking at the rings, our office and Canyon, we really worked this a lot. We went down to Las Vegas, Nevada, detectives, a whole group of them, to interview a woman that was thought to be in possession of Linda's ring. Carey's sister-in-law recalled that he actually traded the ring to this woman for drugs in her presence. There was all sorts of conflicting statements with that. She didn't remember the ring. She said she didn't know Carey Burgess, but she did have some motive to lie. She was a known drug dealer. So, but they did a lot of work on the case. The hairbrush and the red dress, or the red halter top, we still have those in evidence. We'd like to look, especially at the red halter top, some more. But again, an astronomical probability of the depositor of the DNA being on Linda Short's was contributed by Carrie Burgess, is what our findings were, Cellmark's findings were. So we interview him in April of 2000 alongside CCSO Detective Wayne Christie. Burgess said he didn't want to know anything about Linda. He didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. Back in '89, our office interviewed Carrie, and he denied ever meeting Linda. So his DNA being found on her shorts, at this point we know that as we re-interview him in 2000, he needs to explain that. He doesn't. In fact, he denies ever saying that he never met Linda. And he says that, in fact, in that interview, I just walked in and walked out and I didn't even talk. Well, that interview was actually 4.5 hours long. So he's kind of changing his story. But during the interview, it was said that he never actually denied murdering Linda. He would only say that perhaps we were looking at the wrong person. He made little to no denials when accused of at least, being involved in what we knew up to that point. But he was mostly defiant, and that kind of thing. So the day he was interviewed, we had a meeting with Canyon County Sheriff's Office and the prosecuting attorney here in Ada County, and we were informed that we needed to show that Linda was for sure deceased before Carrie could be charged. We also knew at that time that Carrie himself was terminal, and so time was running out. So it was decided that since Linda's red top appeared to be stained with blood, that we would find a way to get her DNA and get that collected so that we could perhaps show that she at least sustained a violent assault and a probability of homicide. But this is the early days, the infancy of familial DNA techniques and things like that. And so there was some navigating that was going on. Well, in the meantime, IDOC, Idaho Department of Corrections staff, is aware of our investigation. They attempt to learn more information from Carrie Burgess about Linda's death. And he reports to IDOC staff, he basically made statements to the effect that the body was not recoverable and that people wouldn't want to know the details because there were others that were involved in her abduction. And so he didn't really cooperate on that. And even though possible immunity was discussed at times because he was dying. And unfortunately, in March of 2001, we were no longer able to interview Carrie Burgess as he did pass away from his illness. And so Canyon County Sheriff's Office closed their report on March 5th, 2001, and Carrie Burgess remained a main suspect in Linda's disappearance and probable death. So that takes you through what Canyon did. Where we are now, right now, the Ada County Sheriff's Office is and has been for the past couple of months reanalyzing important items of evidence which we believe may reveal new clues as to the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Linda Hatfield. We have literally dozens of items of evidence that were recovered from Linda's car, from the canal, from other locations as well. So we're very hopeful that some of these items will provide us with new information and maybe some new direction on the case. Our office recently conducted a very comprehensive review of past statements provided to law enforcement, and we've made some interesting findings there that I'll just keep confidential for right now. As well, we've reviewed and are reviewing dozens of audio recordings as time permits from past interviews, and we're slowly, just re-examining these for content, and there have been some interesting revelations found thus far in these as well. So. Particularly when we compare that information with things that have surfaced in later years. We recently examined the evidence I mentioned. Our office recently re-entered Linda into NCIC as a missing person. Another agency removed her from NCIC for reasons unknown to us several years ago. So we resubmitted her dental information. And we also, I should point out, at one point during this investigation, flyers had been put out at the prison, for anyone that might have information. And About 25 years ago, one inmate came forward and stated that he knew Burgess. He recalled how Burgess had confessed to him about several unsolved rapes that he had committed over the years, and this kind of tied into what Burgess's brother-in-law had told us as well. Although that inmate didn't know anything about Burgess killing Linda, he did say that Burgess once told him that he had to kill someone to become a member of a particular motorcycle club. It was part of the initiation process for Burgess, is what he said. So we're very interested in hearing from those who may have information regarding other crimes that Burgess may have committed, but perhaps was not charged with. So I want to make sure that that's known. Some other things that we've been doing. Our office was recently in contact with some of Linda's family, and we revealed to them, what we learned over the years. We wanted to make sure that they were kept up on that. Certain family members had been told much of this information years ago, but we just didn't know how much of that they had passed on to the rest of the family, given their circumstances and situation. And as we found out, that may have impeded them from making other families aware of information. We wanted to reach out to them, so we've done that. Fingerprints from Linda's vehicle are currently being reanalyzed for the first time in nearly 30 years, and we have a lot of them, so we're working through that. We may submit some items from within the vehicle for DNA analysis as we move forward. So we'll be interested to learn more about who all was in Linda's vehicle around the time of her disappearance, as we have some information about that as well. Our office is going to be following up with NamUs. They're a public information database. You can get on there and look up missing unidentified persons, remains, and so forth. I know a lot of people they search these websites, and sometimes they come up with some interesting information, and they've passed that on to us in the past. So we want to make sure that we get Linda into NamUs. So we'll be working on that this week. We also, as I mentioned, we intend to speak with our forensics folks and see how they feel about reviewing a couple of possible locations as we hope to recover Linda's remains at some point. We believe that even if Kerry attempted to burn Linda's remains, as he had kind of alluded to, that it would be very difficult for him to dispose of her remains in the way that he spoke, because based on what experts have told us, there would still be significant evidence of her remains that we could locate today. So we are hopeful that we can still look for and possibly recover her remains. And while it may take some time before certain results are submitted back to our office, we do hope that anyone that has information about Linda's disappearance will come forward, because it's important that those that are still alive, who knew Linda at the time of her disappearance, and especially those who worked with her, that they come forward with any information they may have, or that they may have withheld all these years. As I know from doing this a little bit, that keeping secrets for so long can be hard on a person's conscience. I've had people say that to me. So for those who may be getting up in age and wanting to clear their conscience before it's too late, and that could be something very important to think about. And as far as this case and others, I'm certainly here and willing to be a resource for people to do just that. So that kind of closes out what we want to say on Linda's abduction at this time and her likely homicide.
That's it for this episode. As always, we remain committed to bringing victims justice and families the answers they've waited far too long for. Linda's case is still under investigation. If you have any information, no matter how small it may seem, please call 208-577-3102.